Welcome to Forthright, and I'm sitting down today with Chud Wendle, who is Executive Director for the Hutton Settlement. And there's an interesting story for how he got involved with commercial property downtown and starting the Spokane Commercial Property Council. So welcome, Chud.
Thanks, Sulani. And it's sort of a unique path how I got here. Our founder of the Hutton Settlement, Levi Hutton, when he founded the settlement, he set up the operations to care for the children, the orphans, but with an endowment of commercial real estate. And so for 102 years, commercial real estate rental income has actually funded the operation. So today, about 90% of our $2 million budget's coming from commercial property rent. And during 2020, so my job primarily is managing the commercial real estate. And during 2020, we just saw some increased expenses in property management. And it mainly came down to some homeless transient type mitigation expenses like increased security because of some loitering, graffiti removal, garbage removal, vandalism to the property. And so through that, got talking to some other property owners that were in the same boat. And I had reached out to the elected officials who I thought, maybe would want to help or hear or do something about it. And there wasn't much response back. And from the other property owners, we're hearing the same thing. And so we felt if there was a handful of us that got together with a unified voice and just shared with the city to see what can we do together, not to put it on them, but what can we do together. And so one thing led to another, and here comes the Spokane Commercial Property Council. And
operating like one of the other neighborhood councils.
Exactly. And so that was modeled. And it actually came, our neighborhood resource officer, Tim Schwerin, is the one that came up with the concept. And he said, you know what, for you to be closest to the city, the elected officials, why don't you establish a council? Even though commercial property is scattered throughout the city of Spokane, they're not really represented in the neighborhood councils. So what if you form a commercial property council? And so we met with Council President Beggs back in February, I believe, and there was about 25 of us at the time.
February of 2020.
2021.
2021,
Yep.
Okay.
And we met with them at the time and just presented what we're going through and the issues. And a lot of them were the same, whether you're downtown, north side, east central. We were just seeing a lot of the same situations. And our one ask of the council president was, would you recognize us as a commercial property council? And he said, yes, we would. And so from that point forward, we moved together with the police department. And then we had a dedicated administration from the city administration. And we had two council people, Council Member Wilkerson and Council Member Cathcart at the time, and then also Commissioner Kearns that participated. So once a month this whole year, we've convened. And really our mission is not necessarily just to say we got problems. It's how do we solve the problems? And that comes through education and understanding this homelessness ecosystem of what's out there. And I think a lot of us think, you drive through Brown Street Viaduct and you have the answer, like just ship them out. Well, it's not that easy. It's complicated and there's a lot going on, and it's just not, there's a lot more to it than what we see.
There's a concept in talking about decisions and systems where there's a difference between complex and complicated. Mm-hmm. Complicated is engineering. Right? It's your phone. It breaks. Somebody knows how to fix it. It only does one thing. It's not going to jump out of your pocket and bake an apple pie. I mean, it just does that thing. Complex is anything that involves humans or ecosystems or natural systems of any kind, because biological systems adjust and humans certainly adjust too. You make a change here, and unexpected. We call them unintended consequences when we talk about legislation. But that's what that is. It's the system self-adjusting. And when you called it the homeless ecosystem, that brought to mind that analogy.
And I'll tell you, and it is complex and it's multidimensional. And I think we went out and toured about 8 to 9 shelters and met with several providers. We even did ride-alongs.
With the Spokane Police
Department, yeah, and to see through their eyes what they're going through and what some of the regulations and restrictions they're operating under. And then we met with the city, tried to meet with city elected officials. And then what we really wanted to do is look at best practices out there. Like what other communities are doing, both successes and failures, and try it, because we don't want to recreate the wheel.
Right.
But
And you don't want to make the same mistakes somebody else has already made.
exactly. And we have a couple communities over on the west side that I think we got to look at. And what did they do to get where they're at, Seattle and Portland? And what are some things that we don't have to do to go there? We're, a couple years behind them, and there's things that we can see in the windshield and say, we're not going to go that direction. Let's go a different direction. Through that, we've connected with Houston, the mayor's office in Houston, Texas, and we connected with the city of San Diego. Both of those communities have made big strides towards addressing it. And it's not just relocating the homeless. It's the community embracing it, the business partners coming together with the government and the providers and seeking solutions.
I know there's been some writing lately about pointing out how 20 years ago, I think I would have also been on board with the kind of libertarian notion that the drugs it's a victimless crime, and why are we criminalizing drugs? But there's so many people I have met in the last 20 years, partly through connections with Teen Challenge, who've said, it was getting arrested that got my attention, and that was the beginning of being able to turn my life around. And it just seems like we're losing something when we say, it's not kind, it's not merciful to let someone wallow in an addiction.
Yeah. And I think my eyes were open when I went out with the law enforcement and did the ride-alongs, and I see the compassion they're showing for the individuals living on the street, and it's hard to see that life. And at the point we're at now, this Martin versus Boise sit and lie restriction, I think has led to a lot of what we're seeing on the streets, because there's sometimes I think there's a point where these individuals need to be, they aren't going to change their behavior on their own, and that's going to have to be done, and a lot of times it's going to be enforcement.
Well, and that's a big ask. Think about any behavior you've tried to change in yourself. That's tough. And if you're struggling with addiction, mental health, any of those things, it's going to be even tougher. Yeah. I did a ride along with a Spokane Police Department as well, just one, and really I understand what you're saying about the compassion that they show. They know who they're working with, and they also, there's not much they can do except try and just keep things as calm as possible for everybody.
It was really hard when I did it. The drug decriminalization law had just passed or gone into place. And to see, it's almost twofold. One, the officers wanting to show the compassion, but knowing they can't do anything with somebody using. But then the one using is almost using it to just say, see, you can't do anything now. And it's frustrating, because I think that our state, when they did it, they probably had good intentions. They wanted to possibly lead these individuals to some type of counseling, some drug and alcohol counseling. Unfortunately, what's happening, though, is that they have 2 strikes before they get the 3rd misdemeanor. We can't even track them. So tracking 1 strike, 2 strike. Right. So I see the behavior getting more aggressive and more unpredictable.
Right. And it's not, just as it's not fair to leave someone in that kind of situation without maybe pulling the reins back and getting their attention, they do present a hazard to the residents of downtown, to your business owners that are in your properties, and to people coming downtown who are starting to not want to.
Yep. It has a big impact on a lot. I mean, whether it's your employees, safety, your customer safety, tourism, even children. I've had my son come down. He actually works at Dutch Bros downtown, and he's just shook his head going, what's going on here? And is he safe when he walks to and from his car from the stand?
I worked downtown for a long time, and I always felt pretty safe. In fact, I probably, one of the dumbest things I ever did was there was a fellow ran out of the alleyway behind this very building we're sitting in, coming down the street towards me. He was chasing somebody else, and he was carrying an axe, and somehow I knew he wasn't chasing me, and so I should have walked across to the other side of the street. But there was really a sense that things were safe, much safer then. Now I know that I would see that situation developing, and with the drugs that are out now, it's not just somebody who's been drinking too much Mad Dog all day, and some of the drugs are creating drug-induced schizophrenia, drug-induced mental health problems. It's And it can be much more violent and unpredictable.
It is. And when you go to a community like Boise, Idaho, and you go out at night, there's a whole different sense of safety there where you feel safe. You can go from, restaurant to restaurant, do any kind of entertainment at night, and you don't feel like you have to look over your shoulder there. Here it's a different, whether it's daylight or nighttime, there's just a sense of, am I going to be okay?
Yeah, so there are some solutions that you have found, you and your group, as you've been looking around. What are a couple of good, positive things we can end on here?
Well, I think the big part of this is that really when you take the stakeholders, the government and the providers and the business, there's so much more in common if we come together. And we have these conversations going, but it seems like the fray ends up on the media and social media. And so the yelling happens and the pointing fingers. I really think there's a common ground that we can come to. Some of the things we're doing is the private sector stepping up. We're coming together with funding to start addressing it. And it's not just to go say this is bad. It's to find solutions, fund solutions. We're modeling it after a San Diego foundation called the Lucky Duck Foundation. And it's in motion right now as we go. But some things that we need to do is like track the data. And what San Diego did is they started a full case management and data tracking. It's real time. It's just not that one annual point in time count. So they can see what's happening with the ebbs and flows and is a new initiative working or not working. So that's one piece. Case management and reunification. A lot when I was out on the ride along, I learned a lot of the individuals that we met on the street were not from Spokane. And most of them opened up about where they were from. What if we connected with that family, said, hey, we have your relative here. They're fine, but they could really use you. Would you be there to welcome them back? That's happening in San Diego, and they're showing it and proving it. So there's some positives. I think, it's going to take the whole community, though. It's not just one sector of our community that's going to need to address it.
Okay. So what are some things that people could perhaps do? Where could they find more information or get involved?
Well, I think our group is now, it's a little over 800 on Facebook, and it's a group page called Spokane Business and Commercial Property Council. That's where a lot of information is. We do meet monthly as a council.
And I've attended a couple of those on Zoom, and they've been some really interesting presentations, some good discussions.
Try to have different perspectives and entities within the community. We have an email distribution list, and by just getting a hold of me through that Facebook group page would be a great way, and I can connect the individual on that. And then I think it's just being educated as we come into the election. Because our elected officials do hold the purse strings, and funding really drives, what we want to drive. And so I think there's some accountability that we need to make sure that our elected officials are serving and spending our money wisely. And as we look to this election coming up, I think it's critical that we look at it with the lens of, public safety and what's a plan to move forward. Our mission is to be the safest and cleanest city in the U.S. And if we look at it through that lens, I think you can really just figure out quickly on, who's going to represent what entity and how are we going to try to solve becoming the cleanest and safest city.
I think one thing we sometimes overlook that when we talk about public safety, it's not just for, say, the well-dressed person on the sidewalk who's trying to get to work, but it's also for that person who's found themselves down and out.
Exactly.
Safety for everybody.
It is. And we got to look at it through all eyes. And when we do, and an individual's living on the street and their safety at night is jeopardized, we got to do better as a community.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate you coming in for this conversation, Chud, and it'll be interesting to see how things play out in this year's elections.
All right. Thanks, Tulani.